Hello, everyone. Welcome to Real Talk Food Safety with Tia and Jill. Welcome.
Welcome everyone to the midweek
Yes,
Wednesday.
yes. You know, this is so interesting because it is midweek, right? And I feel like Tuesday, I'm like, how is it only Tuesday? Then once you kind of get over Wednesday, you're like, oh, it's Thursday. Oh, okay, it's Friday. And so I love it that we do real talk in the middle of the week because it's like, we talk about a lot of things, right? Like just you and I. And as we talk about things that kind of like fill our minds at the beginning of the week, this is like just an opportunity for us to really just be like, this is what's been on our mind, right? And we kind of weave it into what we talk about on our hump day, right?
Mhm.
So I think it's interesting, and I know I kind of just went off on a tangent, but I love it that we're here on Wednesdays, middle of the week, middle of the day, because it allows me to kind of just have this conversation, right, with you, Jill, but also with our audience to talk about like
Yes.
what's really been on our minds.
Well, that's why we do this, right? Because we don't want it to be like, here's a webinar, let us present information, right?
Yes.
In full disclosure, right? We don't come here completely unprepared. We want to make sure you walk away and you're like, huh, I didn't think of it that way. Or, hey, Jill and Tia, have you thought of it this way?
Yeah.
Um, we're very intentional in what we bring forward because it's what we're hearing, what we're seeing. Like you
Mhm.
said, what's on our mind because it's been percolating as we've been talking about food safety culture.
Yeah.
How do we help build better, stronger technical leaders?
Mhm.
If
Mhm.
you're out there, I'll be the one to say, right? I would have said years ago, I'm a technical expert. I would never have even associated myself as a technical leader because we're so championed to be experts.
Yes.
Even
Yeah.
if I manage people, I'd be like, well, yeah, I manage people, but I'm an expert.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
always was the trump card. And so the reason
Mm.
we do this is because for us to drive food safety culture, and when I say us, I mean you out there,
Yes.
to drive food safety culture, like you have to fully not only embrace you're a leader, but also what it takes and means to be a leader in this space.
Yes. And I feel like that is where I didn't get it until
I
we
didn't get
really
it.
dove deep because it's like I saw myself as a leader, right? And I felt like I was a leader, whether I'm leading people or leading teams or leading, food safety in the organization. Even right as a quality engineer, I felt like I was a leader in my organization. But I didn't really link to me on like what does it mean to be a technical leader in a space?
Mm.
And how is that different from other leaders at the organization? And how we lead, right, is different because
Totally.
what you were saying, we are first technical experts in all of our school, all of our technical knowledge. It's really training us to be technical experts, to understand data, to be able to display data, to be able to talk about it, right? And present it. But what we miss out on are those leadership skills, and not just the basic leadership skills, right?
Mhm.
That's all a part of being a leader. But how do I take what I'm learning about influence? How do I take that and apply it to where I am? To in a space with other technical experts or in a space where I'm talking to someone that might not be a technical expert. And so we have to really almost like shift our mind on how we are thinking about leadership because our roles are just so different and interesting, and just the space that we're in is unlike any other group. And it's funny, other groups can also say the same thing, and that is probably
They can.
true, right?
Mhm.
Like, that's why they should also think about leadership in a different way. But being in this technical space, I really didn't pick up on we need something different when
Yes.
we as we grow as leaders. And if we're going to take on food safety culture, which is what we're talking about today, right? Like if we're going to take on food safety culture, we have to have the right tools, right? To lead that and to be a part of it and to not get burnt out and overworked and wanting to quit. right?
Yes, and be more effective
Mhm.
and authentic and genuine to ourselves. Because I think the
Yes.
other part is what I know I did, right? You all have probably heard this story. I feel like I sold out for a while,
Mhm. Yeah.
right? Trying to be a leader like somebody else or how the organization said this is how we do things, even though I was like, ooh,
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
doesn't quite feel right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you're curious about when we talk about why it needs to be different, 2 shows ago, so if you go out to our website on our blog, 2 shows ago, we actually did an entire real talk about why generic, like one size doesn't fit all.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
check that out. And I'm curious for those that are on with us, does any of this resonate with you?
Yeah.
And if it does, which part? Share in the comments because that's important for us to know. Or are you like, you guys are so off base?
Yes, let us
Or
let
you out there
us
like,
know
yes,
too.
yes, yes. That's how I have been feeling, or that's how I have felt.
Yes, yes. And I mean, we know we're not off base because this is really what we do. And if you we haven't introduced the topic yet, but this just kind of flows into who we are, right? And because this is what we do, this is what we love to do. So if you are new listening to Real Talk Food Safety, I'm Tia. This is Jill, and at Catalyst, we really do help technical experts step into technical leadership. And we're all about helping leaders really learn and use and shift their minds, right, around what it means to be a leader and how to lead in their technical space. And we're all about culture and helping leaders, manage that shift and build their cultures. So welcome, welcome,
Welcome, welcome.
welcome.
Yeah, and last week we had the amazing Yvonne Masters, Dr. Yvonne Masters, on with us. And we talked about how do we be more inclusive leaders
Mhm.
and really looking at like what type of stereotypes do we bring and even the diversity and inclusion and all these parts, like that all impacts food safety.
Yeah.
So that's where we want to go a little bit further because belonging is different than just including. And you may
Mm,
be like, what? Maybe I'm like slicing hairs here. But you think about this all because we're like, oh, hey Tia, will you join the meeting with me? Hey Tia, will you give me ideas? Hey Tia, can you share this?
yeah.
All because I'm asking doesn't mean that Tia is feeling a sense of belonging.
Right. Yeah. Yes.
And I
Exactly.
think that's a really big part for us to consider because what we may be feeling like we're doing all the right things. And yay, if we're thinking, gosh, I'm being intentional on how I'm leading and how I'm making sure I'm asking those things and inviting people. That is amazing. Keep doing it.
Mhm.
But today we want to talk about how do we go one step further so that the people on the other end that are in this with us are like, yes, I feel like I belong.
Yeah. And that's important because, and I would love to hear your thoughts even out there, added to the comments where, oh, people say, oh, well, food safety was there, right? Like I invited food safety to it. But then we get to the meeting and no one's listening. It's as if we're not there. Everyone forgets what we say when we leave the room, and tries to go down, their own path without having our input. And we really feel like we don't matter, right?
Mhm.
And that we're really not making a difference. Even though we're there, we're screaming at the top of our lungs, we're saying, yes, do this, no, don't do that. Let's have a conversation about it. Just tell me if you're thinking about doing something different, right? Like, think about you saying those words, right? I know I've said them many times, like, just loop me in so I will know how to protect you and our business and our products, right? And our consumers. Just let me know. And when we feel like we're banging our head against the wall and like what we're saying just does not matter, who we are really does not matter, that's when we feel like we don't belong. So, like you said, I can be included, right? I could sit in the meeting. I could, maybe they CC me on the email, but I'm really not a part of the group. I really don't feel like I matter or that people see me and hear me and, that they want me to actually be a part of the solution. And that's right up with not just food safety culture, but culture. And if you don't have that belonging there for your team, whether they're in food safety or they're in operations or maintenance. If
Mhm.
people don't feel like they belong, then it doesn't matter how great your programs are. It doesn't matter that you have everything, documented on what you want to do. It doesn't, those things need to be there. But if people don't feel this sense of belonging and ownership around it, then you're missing the people leg,
Yeah,
right? Of culture.
exactly. And I think it's, the full engagement of culture, because right, there's different levels within that engagement that represent culture. But we're also talking about, like, how do we build the place that we've always wanted to be? How do
Mm,
we build the places that help us be more effective? How do we help build the places where people want to be there? Like, I get to do this. I get to go to work, not I have to go to work.
right. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
this shifting in our mindset of how we are creating these spaces for people to want to come along versus they have to come along.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Nina, I see your comment where you say every day no one actually cares about quality. Like imagine if you walked into work every day and you're like, man, people care. People care about quality. People care about me. People care about operations, people care about maintenance, people care about our work, right? Like that is the sense of belonging where every day you're like, we might not get every action right, but I know people care. That's like a whole sense of belonging.
It is. And I know today the way we've kind of structured kind of how we want to share this information is around the famous Oprah quote that I love.
Yes.
The do
Yes.
you hear me? Do you see me? Does what I say matter?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Three sim- three simple questions that are oh so difficult and mean so much.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And even as a leader, as we walk through each of these, right, and how you can ensure that your people, feel seen and heard, and they have a sense that what they say and who they are matter. I would even challenge you, ask your team these questions, and I want to know too, like, have you asked your team these questions? Hey, do you feel like I hear you?
Yeah. And you could even do, like, on a scale. Like, I think even with belonging, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you feel belonging that you belong here at work and in these spaces?
Mhm. Just ask the
And I
question.
think it's so important because Harvard Business Review had published information about how people feel with belonging.
Mhm,
And the reality is a majority of leaders are white,
mhm,
and they're many men.
mhm,
But when we look at this, we see that white men and women tend to feel a greater sense of belonging than Black, Asian, Latino, any other groups, Black, brown people, anywhere.
yeah,
And I think that really says a lot because there is this gap. And it's not just me and Tia, like
yep,
two people. It's like by groups too.
yeah, yeah, and that's important, and, we talked about it last week even with
Mhm.
Yvonne, where it's asking that question, having that data, and acknowledging it, right?
Mhm.
Like, if you are a leadership team and your leadership team is not diverse, right? And it doesn't look like the people that's making the product or the people that are responsible for day-to-day food safety, then you have work to do, right? Like
Mhm.
you have work to do, number one, to make your leadership team more diverse, but also to ask the question of, does my team feel like they belong here?
Yeah.
Do my team feel seen and heard? And do they feel like I care about them, that I care about the work that they do? And the data that you just read to us, Jill, is that it seems like that they probably don't. So how do you ask those questions and then intentionally make sure that they do feel like that they matter and that they belong in your space? Is like, we like to say, right, like this is the first step around culture. right? Like
Yes.
if your people do not feel like they belong or that they matter, then all the other stuff that you're going to try to do around food safety culture is just going to fall flat,
Yeah.
right? So you have to start with these questions, and you have to start with acknowledging that you may have a gap here.
Hmm. And I think that's the big part. And I want to be clear that these are factors that impact belonging, but there are more.
Mm-hmm.
And so as we go through this, we are talking about like human to human connection, the people focus of just humanity in the workplace.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
So,
When we talk about belonging, it seems like it's this big thing, right? Like how do I get my team to feel like that they belong?
yes.
And we always say it starts with intention,
Hmm.
being intentional about it, getting the data, acknowledging it, and then intentionally going about creating space where people feel like that they belong there.
Yes. And I think that's where people say, well, how do I do that? Like, how do I actually ask the right questions? How do I, even if I'm intentional, what does that look like?
Yeah. Yeah. When we talk about, inviting people into our space and looking for new ideas, do we step outside of our circles,
Hmm.
right? Like, do you always ask the same people for their ideas, whether or not it's your friends or this group I feel comfortable talking with? And so those are the people that you always go to ask for ideas to seek out a different path. At what point do you step outside of your group, right, and ask people that you might not typically ask?
Yeah. Sometimes it's even the things like, gosh, if you go to lunch together, like, do you invite everybody? Like, hey, come on, we're all going to lunch. Or are you like, there's one little group, we all go to lunch together.
Hmm.
And even if I see someone over there, I don't like go, hey, we're going to lunch. You want to come along with us?
Yes, yes,
Those things matter because
they
those are
do.
the things that people feel different types of connections with.
Hmm. Yeah,
And one of the things part of belonging, right, is being connected to our coworkers.
yeah.
There's
Hmm.
a reason why Gallup says that people who have like a best friend at work tend to have higher engagement levels.
Yes, it's true. It's true. And even as you think about, so I thought about this all the time, and as a leader, I intentionally try to surround myself with different people and being able to like sit in groups that might be different from my team or even different from my peer set. So, and in my past, I worked at an organization where we will have shift meetings, like with everyone, all of first shift will come, and it might be something around us talking about goals and where we are and where we're going for the next quarter. If you work in the facility or even at corporate, right, you might remember these town hall meetings, like a town hall meeting.
Mhm.
And leadership is leading the meeting, of course, for their different areas. But leadership will always sit in the front row together. And they would talk with one another, right? They're engaging with one another, but everyone else would sit, right, in all the other chairs behind them. I always made it a point to find my seat somewhere in the audience. And I intentionally did that because I don't want to be seen as someone that, is separate, that is not reachable, right? Or for it to look like I don't belong in that crowd, right? Or they don't belong up front with me. I would even call people, hey, sit down here, right here in front. The front row is not designated for
Certain
senior
people.
leadership. Right, exactly. You too can come sit with us, right? But one other thing that I got from doing that is that I could hear what people would say, right? So as leadership is going through the deck, right, and saying, great job here, this is what we need to work on here, this is our focus on, I can hear what people say about it, right? And what their thoughts are about it. And I can have conversations with, oh, that's interesting. You said that when that slide was up. What do you think? Tell me more about that.
Yeah.
That's starting to get into, does my thoughts, what I say matter? Right? Like, do you
Yeah.
see me? I'm out here. Do you see me? And do you really value me as a part of the team? And I give that example because as leaders, sometimes we could separate ourselves just trying to do our job, right? Just trying to, okay, I know I need to present. I know this, all the leaders always sit here, right? So as a leader, that's where I need to go sit.
Yeah.
How do you intentionally do something different that might be creating a sense of, you know, unbelonging for people?
Yes. And I
Unbelonging.
think that's a big part because when we talk about these three, do you see me? Do you hear me? Does what I say matter? There are things that we can do as individuals within each of these. There are things we can do as a team, but then there are also things our organization can do in
Yes.
these spaces as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's jump into, I know we've kind of talked about belonging in like this broader way, but let's get down into it and really talk about the do you see me,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And when we say that, right, some things come up with like, do people look like me
Hmm.
in the organization? Right? If I'm, speaking from my perspective as a Black female, if I'm looking at my leadership team and there are no Black women on the leadership team, do I see that as being attainable?
Hmm. Yeah. It makes a difference. And, do you see me? Do we have similar backgrounds or
Mm.
anything in common? It doesn't mean we have to like all grow up in the same place and all that, but do we have some things that are common and things that aren't common so that we can relate to each other?
Yeah. And do we talk about those things? Like we know that we have more things in common than what's different.
Yeah, because at face value, you and I would be like, well, we probably don't have a lot, but look, we have a ton in common.
We
We
do.
we grew up in different places.
Mhm.
We have, right, we are in
Different.
different generations. We
Yes.
like all these, we live in different places now.
Yes.
There are all
Yes.
these things that people would be like, what even brought you together? But those were things that we found
Yes, absolutely. And we're intentional about it, right? Like,
very
in
much.
order for us to even get to know each other, we have to be intentional about learning about others, about
Yeah.
seeing other people, right? And we know that there's more things in common with one another. So you, as a leader, right, it's our responsibility to find out what do we have in common and how do we have those discussions.
Yes. And I think when we talk even like this kind of higher, like what do we have in common? But do you see me? Or even basic things like when you pass me in the hall, do you make eye contact and greet me?
Mm,
Because
yeah.
I've certainly been in places where it's almost like there's a rule, like don't look. And I think, gosh, I do because I want the humanness in me wants to recognize and honor the humanness in you. And if
Yes.
I shy away from that, what I'm saying is like, I don't see you.
Yes, yes. I used to work at a facility where some people only spoke Spanish. And if you know me, I might know a little bit of words, but I do not speak Spanish fluently. And there was this one guy that worked there and he did not speak English at all. But I always said good morning to him. I always said hello, buenos dias, hola. I always spoke with him. And I remember him talking with HR, who was she was my work bestie, right? She was a really good friend of mine. And one of the feedback that she gave me was that, this guy was having problems with his direct supervisor. And one thing that he said to her was, I'm having a hard time even just relating to my supervisor and like getting on the same page when I see Tia every day and she says hello to me every day. She smiles at me every day. I feel more connected to her and we don't even speak the same language.
Mm.
And when my HR manager gave me that feedback, I was like, wow, I had no idea it was making that type of impact on him. He felt like he belonged in my
Beautiful.
space, even though we didn't speak the same language. And it's
Yeah.
exactly what you're saying, Jill, on just because I spoke to him every time I saw him.
Well, and that's being very intentional on I'm here to include everyone,
Yes. Yeah.
not just I'm interacting with the people that I interact with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
I think we can also even go further because I think we do have such diverse populations and food that like how do we embrace that further and even learn more?
Yes.
So
Yes.
yeah, I've been challenging myself like What books can I read? What movies can I watch? What places can I go so I get to have new experiences? Just
Mhm.
yesterday, right, I was complaining about our local university, even though they're great, but I was like, I'm trying to find how to get notified every time like our multicultural center has events because I don't want to miss any.
Mm,
I
mhm.
want to be in this space where I get to learn something new and I get to like really open my perceptions
Mhm.
and probably a bunch of unconscious bias that I have so that I can understand that and I can create spaces for more belonging for people.
Yeah, yeah, because as organizations are looking at more diverse groups, it's just not enough to say, yes, we have a diverse team. But if
Mhm.
you're not actually trying to see those individual people on your team, then you're missing the point of having a diverse team. So I love it when you talk about like how do I step outside of myself and learn, right? And be ready to have interactions with people that may be different than me and share a
Yeah.
different background or be a different generation or whatever it happens to be. How do I start to build those skills? I love it when I love this example, Jill, because you're talking about intention. You don't
Mm,
have to go out and look at being notified, right? You could
right.
say, you know what, if there's events, I'm sure I will see them.
It's
No,
not
like
true. That's the whole problem. I haven't. So now I'm like, I'm going to go out and get them.
right, you're being intentional, right? You're being intentional about it. You're being intentional about stepping outside of yourself, right? And as leaders, as we're trying to create this space of belonging, it's important for us to be intentional about it. Not say, oh, well, they should let me know about it, or
Right.
they should do this. Nope. It's about you. How
Yeah.
can you be intentional?
Because leadership's a verb, right? It's about taking action.
Yeah.
Even
Yeah.
if, right, it's all about ideas and action equal the outcomes,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is important because even as an individual, when we see that perhaps people aren't being included, because sometimes people don't even recognize it. I'm sure I've done it and I haven't recognized it. And it'd be cool if somebody would be like, oh, hey, did you notice so and so was over here? Did you
Yeah.
miss them or what?
Mhm, mhm,
Right?
mhm.
It's okay to ask people about that because it's typically unintentional, but
Yeah.
it's the whole airport thing. See something, say something.
Yes, yes. And you're right about that, right? And it's so important. We talk about this in boot camp on
Mhm.
how to create that safe space to receive feedback, right? And for someone to come to you and say, "Hey, I've noticed, right? I've
Mhm.
noticed that every time in a meeting, Tia is quiet and she doesn't say much. Maybe this is not the right environment. Maybe we're not creating the right environment for her to speak up. How do we make sure that we show her that we see her
Yeah.
and that we want her to be here with us? And we are working on creating an environment where it's clear that we see her.
Hmm. I think that goes to even, I love that it doesn't have a name. Our comment is that do you see me thread a lot.
Mhm.
Because when we're working with people, especially food safety culture, do we see them? But then do we also, as leaders, we have to be willing to step up and say, did you see that person? Like,
Yeah.
how are you being intentional about that?
Mhm.
Because those are the things that help us all collectively move forward to create more spaces of belonging.
Yes. 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 And I love the comment too calls out like it's important at the plant level
Hmm.
in corporate level. A lot of people think that a lot of people try to relate this to the plant, and that is so important, right? And
Hmm.
you 100% need a sense of belonging in your facilities. You also need a sense of belonging at your corporate level.
Hmm.
And you have to be able to see each person in your organization, and each of them need to feel like they belong because we hired them for a reason, right? We
Yes.
hired them to be a leader in the organization. And if they're not engaged, right, then we have engagement issues, we have retention issues, we have people. If you've been through any of our presentations, sometimes we show a slide where people are like in the boat, right? There's some people, a lot of people are just sitting in the boat, letting it ride. But can you imagine if everyone was paddling? How much farther we can get and faster we can get, how much productivity we can get, right? It's important that everyone, whether they're at the plant level, corporate level, remote, flexible work style, right?
All of it.
Whatever it is, making sure that you see them.
Oh yeah. I remember a couple plants I had gone to that were within the same company. And one, I probably could have gone in and out and been there all day and nobody would have said anything to me.
Oh,
The
interesting.
other one, I hardly got in the door and people are like, "Hey, so glad you're here." That was felt by everybody in those facilities.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's amazing how this energy and this belonging, right? It's big.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
And I think as individuals we can do things, but even as teams we can set, well, we call them the rules of engagement.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Yeah, we talk about
how
this
do
a
we
lot.
make sure there's space for everybody to be present with us and so that everybody can be seen?
Yes. Yes. And how, as a leader, you're in your team meetings, or you're together as a team. How do you intentionally are making sure that everyone feels seen, that everyone is seen?
Right. Sometimes it's as basic as like we see faces,
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yep.
right? Like who cares if I had, I mean, we've all been like hairnet on, hard hat on, whatever, like
Right. Yeah.
not our dreamy best self, but like this power of seeing each other
Mm-hmm.
is one very easy, tangible step. Like, look, I see you.
Yes. Yes.
Versus I just see Tia,
Right.
like your
Right.
name printed there.
Yeah.
All
And
different.
I love the idea of you. I love the comment that you made of like your team rules of engagement,
Hmm.
right? Like setting that ahead of time to say, as a team, we want cameras on, right? Sometimes too, I've heard stories, especially at COVID when we were all remote, where teams will start on camera and it's their ability to say hello and I see you, right? And have conversation. And then they either go off camera or stay
Mm.
on camera, depending on their level of being comfortable.
Yeah.
But that's their rule of engagement, right? Like that's their team norm. So whether it's on camera, off camera, or either, what is that rule of engagement so that people feel seen?
Hmm. And that even plays into how do we invite people into conversations? So, I'll go to the traditional school model of like, hey, who knows the answer? Me. Like,
Mhm.
that doesn't always invite engagement from everyone.
Yeah.
So, that may be one great way, or that may be what you have in the moment. But what are other ways as a team that you create and invite the engagement that feels more comfortable for everybody?
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that goes back to knowing your team,
Mhm.
right?
And
Knowing your
sorry, that
people.
probably gets in the do you hear me too. Sorry, I'm probably
Mhm.
jumping ahead a little.
I know. But it's really connected.
They are so connected.
They're so connected in the sense of like, making sure that you see me, but a piece of that, and maybe it's time to kind of even move into do you hear me? A piece of that is that you feel heard,
Yeah.
right? Like people see you because you feel heard, right?
Mhm.
And that people are acknowledging, right, that you are here. So it's interesting where you talk about where some people just want like I want to listen. Like this is my time that I really want to listen, and I wanted people to say hello when I come in, and then I really want to just listen so that I can process and then add my thoughts,
Mhm.
right? Being able to see them and say, yes, that's your process and that works for the team. And we know that about you and we're honoring that. That's the see you. When it's time for you to speak and you're ready to speak, people are ready to listen, right?
Mhm.
Like it's not like, oh yeah, you take the time to process and then you process it and you come back and people are not even hearing you. Right. Like they moved on, they've done other things, like whatever, right? But they're not actually hearing what you have to say. You
Mhm.
have to follow it through, right? To actually hearing the person when they're ready to speak, when they're ready to share their stories, when they're ready to when they are being a part of the team, right? Like you have to stop and listen.
You do. And I know we're going to jump into do you hear me, but before we go too far on the do you see me, I just want to add about organizational actions.
Mm-hmm.
because the way we've built organizations in the past, whether it's how we support well-being or safe spaces to say, do you see me? Even our hiring practices, our promotion practices, our development, all of these things. We know from Mercer's employee needs report, like we have totally shifted into a new space. And
Yes.
so as an organization to say, I see you and I see everybody, we also have to think about what we need to do different. That goes into policies and
Mhm.
processes and some of those things like plant versus corporate.
Mhm.
What are the things we need to do different so that everybody feels seen?
Yeah, yeah. I wanna acknowledge, like, this is hard.
Oh yeah, it's
It's
not an
hard
overnight thing.
work. It's not something that you are gonna walk away from today and you're like, "Yes, I can go and we're gonna change the whole organization and we're gonna be good in 30 days." This is hard work and it takes time to move that ship, right? It takes time. And it's because people are in their own habits, right? And this
Mhm.
is the way things have been, right? And people are ready to change until it's time to change, right?
Yes.
So like you have to almost reprogram people to say like we're not just asking, do you feel seen, because we're trying to check a box. We are
Right.
actually interested in hearing your feedback and we want to take actions from that. And then you have to do it again and again and again and again and again and again and
And
again
over and over.
and over and over,
Yeah.
right? Like you have to keep doing it. And it might be you have to keep doing it for 6 months or you have to keep doing it for 6 years because depending on your culture of where you are right now, that's going to decide how long it takes for a new habit, a new direction to stick.
Yeah. And I think the other part is as an individual, hopefully recognizing like I can take individual action and that's awesome.
Hmm.
Do that. When we talk about being leaders and influencing others, that's where then like what actions are we going to take to support our team and others differently?
Yeah.
And as we move into even that and into organizational, we may feel some friction because
Yeah.
what we're going to be doing is a little bit different, or we might be frustrated. And that's why we also wanted to layer in. Not only can you do something as an individual, but perhaps if I'm asking my team some questions to help us perhaps be open minded in a different way, they may be like, "What? We're fine. We've always done it this way." So you'll feel some friction.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely.
So that's something to keep in mind. And even as your team, like I've had this with my team where we're like, gosh, we're doing all this, but nobody else wants to.
Yeah.
Because now we've got our organizational systems and structures that we need to tap into and be like, how do we start influencing there? So it
Hmm.
is progression. And that's something we very much want, you know, that awareness
Hmm.
for us and for
Yeah,
you.
absolutely. You're kind of talking about what we call the catalyst process, where it starts with this spark in yourself and you, right? And then that spreads to your team.
Mhm.
And then eventually you're starting to transform not just your team, but that facility. And then that facility, right, might have an influence on a bigger piece of the
Mhm.
organization. And then before you know it, you're at this stage of acceleration where you're really starting to accelerate through the organization, this fire, right? Through the organization, where now you start to transform even more facilities or even corporate locations, right? And we use that model as we think about organizational change because we know that it starts with a spark. And then we know that transformation has to happen. And then that's where you're seeing that conflict. That's like the longest part, right? That's when you're seeing that conflict. That's when you're doing the habits. That's when you're trying to connect with other people and you're using your influence skills and you're doing all the things that we even talk about in boot camp to so that you can start to accelerate those results.
Mhm. Absolutely. So we talked a little bit about do you see me? Let's talk about do you hear me? And I know we ventured into this one because, well, it's hard not to.
Yeah.
But right, this is not only do I want you to see me, but can you actually hear what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
So,
Yeah. One thing. So if you read our last article in QA magazine, it's all about having new conversations. And we talked a little bit about it on like, have you asked your team
mhm,
questions like, do you feel seen? Do you feel heard? And a big piece of that is, how do you ensure that people can speak and that you are actually intentionally listening and intentionally following up on the things that they say? And if you haven't read the article yet, please do. It's on our page. We can even post a link to it. But like, take a look at it and really think about how you can start having different conversations with your team in your
Mhm.
organization.
Yeah. Because culture is really all about conversations. So when we start changing the conversations and opening that up to hear people, that's
Mm-hmm.
what matters. And I think that's really where we talk about like the really listen to others.
Yeah.
We often talk about our three P's, talking about personal, professional, and priority,
Yes.
right? We don't just, we all know, we don't just bring my work Jill to work. You get the whole Jill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No matter how hard I may be like, that's not coming with me, but it is.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's part of hearing that from others.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people who will still say, well, that's too much personal stuff happening at work. Well, we are people, we are human. So
Mm-hmm.
yes, we all understand there is a balance because we're all here for a purpose to get things done at work. But still, creating space to hear people and what's happening in their lives is incredibly powerful.
Absolutely. And you know what? If you're not doing it, then you're not going to get to the culture that you want to see.
No.
And
And
that's not Tia's opinion or Jill's opinion. That is data, right? Like, we're technical people, right? We kind of started with that. We are technical people, and we look at data, and science tells us that you cannot create a well-rounded culture, a gold standard culture, a world-class culture, whatever term you want to use, for this, this vision of what culture you want to have. You are not going to be able to get there if people cannot bring their full self to work.
yeah.
That people feel like they have to stop short of, okay, who I am outside of work.
Mhm. Yeah, and part of it is having, a lot of people say, "Well, I have one-on-ones with my team members all the time." That's
Yeah.
a great start. One-on-ones are historically geared towards business results.
Mm-hmm.
And so while those are great places to be because we need to have the priorities and professional, how can you bring in a little bit of personal?
Yes. Yes.
Or how do you put on your standard work that I need to do relationship building? And so
Mm-hmm.
maybe every week I need to make sure, like, who did I connect with differently? Did I sit
Yes.
down and have a real conversation?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So there's,
You bring up our three P's that we talk about, in
Mhm.
relationship building in boot camp. And one of the things that we heard from our group is, when we were going through, this module and we were going through our group session, a part of that is practicing this method. And the feedback that we got was, wow, I started using the three P's, and now I'm having more meaningful conversation with my team. Like,
Mhm.
I immediately feel this difference with the type of conversations I'm having with my team.
Mhm.
And not just, we're talking about personal, but like, I see greater movement on even the priorities that we're working on and the input that I'm getting from my team, because I'm starting to use this process.
Yeah.
And you know, I know this process worked, but being able to hear firsthand on, wow, like, this impact to the type of conversations I'm having with my team was just so rewarding for me.
Yeah. And I love when we even have people who are like, I'm even more approachable. I have more people
Yes.
coming up because I've made the effort to intentionally seek out talking with them further.
And this is all building on to, do you hear me?
Yes. And I
Is your
think it goes to the comment we just had too. Like, how do we help people be heard? Because we know food can be noisy.
mm-hmm. Yeah.
We know it can be. And so there are some ways to be able to do this. If you're in an environment where you're like, we can talk, I feel like we're shouting at each other. Like, where else could you maybe go so that you don't feel that pressure of I'm having to shout at you, or what if I miss what you're saying?
Yes.
What a
Yes.
great way to tell somebody, like, what not only do I want to hear you, but what you say matters. Where how about we get coffee together? How about we have lunch together? How about can we find a time where we can even just take you off, out of this role for 15 or 30 minutes, whatever
Mhm.
that is, so we can actually talk out of the production area.
Yeah. I would use it in my training time. So
Mm,
I know I have to give mandatory HACCP training, mandatory food safety training, right? Once a month or whatever your schedule is. I would use some of that time to open it up
yeah.
just to hear. And, I would even start with, I remember an example that's really clear in my head where we were having issues with label verification. We had a mess up, multiple times. And so it's required training if there's a mess up on the line, right? And so at this point, I was at my second or third training. And I remember starting the meeting and I'm like, I have to go through this training. So I'm going to get through the training, but I actually have time left for me to hear exactly what you're thinking,
Mm,
what's on your mind, and why we keep messing up on this check. And so I went through my training and then I just opened it up to the floor. And
mm,
so this is time that's already built in for the training, right? We're outside of that noisy environment. They don't have to think about, oh, this line is going down and beeps. And I really just took my training time to say, what's going on? Tell me, how do I help you on the floor? And I remember after that conversation, like people felt heard. And not even that people felt heard, but I then understood, oh, this is where we're messing up.
mhm.
This is how I can help you. This is how I can change our documentation or add in more alarms, red, green, yellow, right? Like this is where I can help you be better about this important check, right? To make sure we don't have wrong labels going out the door. I got this whole sense of, oh, this is what we're missing,
Mhm.
right? And it's because I just opened up the floor and time that was already set aside for me to speak with the group.
Well, and I know often I may say we're under the gun or we feel like it, like, oh my gosh, we only have this little amount of time to do that. And so perhaps even opening up other things. I know like suggestion, like I'm going to say the proverbial suggestion box,
Hmm.
or even
Hmm.
a place where you could be like, hey, let's jot it up here on this. We used to have a board even, like, let's put it on the board. So the next time we get together, we talk about it.
Yes, yes.
Or even creating a culture where people are all like, can I have 15 minutes of your time today?
Hmm.
Sometime today. And then
Yeah.
being able to do that, which goes into probably of the other part. What tips do you give leaders to help carve out time to connect? You're going to hear me say this all the time. A leader's standard work should be connect with my people, connect with my people, connect with my people.
Hmm.
The
Yeah.
problem as technical people is that we're like, finish this report, go run this experiment, go check this data, go over here, blah, 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 blah. And then we try to fit people in where we think they can.
Yes. Yeah, we talk
So,
about this in boot camp. Like this is like
yeah,
a dedicated time that we talk about in boot camp because it's so important. And it's one of the things that we miss as leaders, right? Like connecting with people, spending time with them, going down, one of the comments on like asking people who actually work on the equipment, asking people who actually make product. We we almost use that time as, oh well, if I get time in my schedule I'm going to go do it,
right,
or if a fire comes up and I have to go do it, I'm going to go do it, right? And
mhm,
then we feel overwhelmed, we feel overworked, like we feel the stress and anxiety because it's not built into the way that we do work. And so
right.
we actually spend time walking through, like, as a leader, how do you make sure that it is your priority to connect with people? It is your priority if you're in a facility to go down and connect with each person in your
Mhm.
responsibility or indirectly in your responsibility. If you're in food safety and quality, you might not have direct responsibility for people on the line. How do you go and connect with them and
Yeah.
find out what's going on? Because that's when you really find out where your gaps in food safety culture is.
And we completely understand many food safety quality roles are not structured in that manner.
Hmm.
They are still the list 32 items long at best that cover everything under the sun that you are supposed to be doing.
Hmm.
And hardly ever there might be one line on there like, provide guidance or, champion for a team, but all the other ones are all technical things.
Right.
So we understand that there is some work, as we say, kind of like system wise, that needs to be done to redesign how we do work, which
Yeah.
is why workload capacity is so important. If you don't have the time to go connect with people as a leader, then I'm going to challenge you to do a workload capacity.
Mhm.
And then when you start sharing that with leaders and talking to your leaders and like, this is why things aren't getting done, or this isn't why we're improving. Well, here's actual data around it.
Yes. Yeah.
Because I think what we find when we talk about being heard, a lot of organizations, or I shouldn't say a lot, I have run into situations I have heard people talk about
Mhm.
where people will say, well, my organization completely supports me. And I'm like, well, then what actions are they taking to do that? And they're like, well, they just told me I can do whatever I want as long as it's within all of these constraints.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
essentially what they're saying is we want you to think big and new ideas, but only within our box.
Yes. Mhm.
And so those are the areas where as an organization, when we talk about how do we hear people different, we need to think about what box are we perhaps implying people need to stay within
Mhm.
and figure out how do we let people out of that box.
Mhm. Yes. 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 This is the work that we do with organizations to help break them outside of that, right? To help them say, okay, what box are we putting around our people, right? Do our people feel heard, right? Do they feel seen? Is their standard work, is their workload capacity significant, right? And over one, right? If you use our workload capacity on, you'll understand that piece. But it's really around that your standard work is a lot more than the available time that you have.
Yeah.
And if the organization, just you, like if you are, really focused on how to shift your organization, right? Like that is your role, is to shift your organization. That's the type of conversation we have,
Mm-hmm.
where it's like, what box are you putting around? And you want to have a different culture, right? But you have these walls, right?
Yeah.
These constraints.
And I think that goes into our last part of does what I say matter?
Mm-hmm.
Consider this. Gallup put out results from a poll and it said only 3 in every 10 US employees agree that their opinions count.
Wow.
30% only 30% of people believe at work that my opinion counts.
Wow. That
How's,
is like,
how's our culture doing?
right, right. Yeah, I mean, like, really, truly, like, if only 30% of your people, of your team, most likely you are not a part of that 30%. You don't feel like what you say matter, right? But even if you are a part of the 30%, then how likely is your team a part of that 30%? Or you're just looking at your organization, right? Can you imagine an organization which, I mean, this is data, right? So people live it every day. But if you really take that data and like acknowledge it and picture it in your mind, like I'm very visual. So picturing it in my mind that only 30% feel like that they can speak up and say what is really on their mind. Like, even with the comments today on like reaching out to people who who's working on the floor that's closest
Yes.
to the ideas, right? Or talking and connecting with people. Even if you do that work, but only 30% is going to actually speak up because they feel like that their opinions don't matter. Like that's significant
That is.
and
But that
surprising.
but that very much talks about why even, organizationally, Gallup has been doing engagement studies and surveys. I'm gonna say like 40 years. I don't even know. I think it's about 40 years. Engagement engagement in the US has not significantly shifted in 40 years,
No.
even with all the gosh, we've made fun workplaces, we've made hybrid workplaces, we've done this, we've done that, we've done all these things that are perhaps important, but yet we're still missing some factors that are allowing people to feel like what they say matters
Yeah.
and
And a lot
empowering them. Because I know engagement is more than just, do you hear me? Part of that is like, I get to actually have the authority to make decisions,
yes, yes.
right?
Yeah.
So
And a
there's,
lot of the reasons of that is that we continue to use the same tools.
we
We
do.
continue to use the same things over and over and expect for there to be a different outcome, which is the definition of insanity, by the way. Probably, probably one of the reasons we feel like we're going crazy in food safety. But it literally the definition of insanity when we are using the same process over and over and over, retrain, retalk, these same things over and over. Like we have to start having different conversations. We have to start being intentional to make sure that people know that their opinions matter and that they are seen, they're heard, and they feel supported in their daily work,
Mhm.
in their careers, right? Like they feel supported on their development, right? Like you have a development plan that is fit for your people and it's not just a one-off, right? It's not just a, oh yeah, you want to be developed, go out and find something and let me know and yep, I'll approve it, and you go and you take a training and yep, we never talk about it again.
Mhm.
Right? Like is that really support?
No. Well, and these are the parts, right? It's not, even though it's only 30%, it kind of is like, oh, all this work that we feel we've been doing, has it really made a difference? Well, yes, it does make a difference. But what we can do is shift so that can make even a bigger difference.
Yes. Yeah.
I think that's the important part. It's not like throw the baby out with the bathwater type thing.
Right.
Like, there are many good things that are happening. Honor those, recognize those, be aware of like these things are going well. These are the things people tell me they really enjoy. How do we move to the next place?
Yeah. I feel
And you
like
as an individual can. And that's, I think, our big message always, right, Tia? Like,
yes,
we sometimes feel overwhelmed because, like, within our organization, they may not be ready to move, or their idea of where it goes is different than yours.
yeah.
And so then sometimes we hold back and wait.
Mhm.
Go for it. Just go for it.
Just go, right? Like we talk about it with influence. Like look at your circle of influence and go for it. Go for it within your circle because people notice,
Mhm.
right? And people see that, wow, Jill's team, they have this sense of belonging that's unreal in this organization. What is she doing?
Mhm.
What is she doing that's different? What kind of conversations is she having? Like, and we see that with people that go through our programs, right? Like they are starting these sparks in their areas and they say, like, people notice. People notice and ask me questions, right?
Mhm.
Around like, what am I doing differently? What type of conversations am I having? How do your people feel like they belong in your group? And hopefully you've been there. I've been there where I might not feel like I belong in my broader organization, but within my team,
Mhm.
right? Like I feel great,
Yeah.
and we have this amazing culture within our team that's like, wow, right? We laugh, we talk, we get things done. Like we're moving,
Like,
we're
we
moving.
get to work together versus we have to work together.
Exactly, exactly. And then now, we're strong and now we're trying to impact our areas, right? Like our areas of influence. And then it's like, okay, now I'm starting to feel like I belong over here and my teams feel like they belong with me, right? And it's again, it's a process,
It
but
is,
it
but
is
that's the
so
magic.
yes,
That's
yes,
the magic, right? When we really step into this, like, I see you, I hear you, and what you say matters.
yes,
Like,
yes.
who can you do that with this week?
Mm,
Just pick
mhm.
one person, one area. This is how big of an impact it can make. It's not like I'm going to do everything tomorrow, like Tia said.
Mhm.
It's the journey. This is
Yeah.
the journey.
It is. It is.
So,
And as you're thinking
whew,
about, you have responsibility around like just your organization and having people belong in your organization. People want to be proud of their organization's values and purpose. So when you think about like what type of culture do I want to have, right, in my organization, and what type of culture do people want to be a part of? That's so important when you think about like, do people feel seen? Do they feel heard? Do they feel like they matter? They know what it takes for them to feel that way.
yeah.
Get that information from them and incorporate that into your values and into your purpose and into your mission. Because that's when people start to feel aligned with what they're doing every day. And they will go that much harder for your business goals, for the path forward, for their people, right? And they get to come to work. They get to work with the people that they're on. They get to launch projects and products and programs, and they get to talk with their consumers versus, the alternative.
Yes. And clearly we could talk about this all day, but we've already been talking about an hour. So, once again, I will shamelessly plug. We have another boot camp starting in May.
We do. We
So,
do.
you want to do it different? We'll drop the link for the preview and check it out.
Absolutely, because we're ready to get over this plateau
Yeah,
of 30%,
you
right?
bet.
You have to do something different, and we were ready for it, right? Which is the reason why we created Catalyst, and we are sharing that knowledge with others, and we would love for you to be a part of this journey.
We would. And you know what? If no matter where you go, we're going to be back here next week, same time.
We
We
are.
have Dr. Mike Woods on with us.
Yes.
We can't wait to have him share that transition, individual contributor to manager,
Yes.
all
Yes.
in the lines of what we've been talking about today and all the other things. So we can't wait to have him on next week and share him with you. So,
Absolutely. You do not want to miss it. So we will be back next week, 12 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Central.
yes.
Join us and we'll be here ready to
Thanks for
talk.
being here.
See you next week. Bye.
Bye, everyone.